Hello students, in this video lecture I will talk about the discovery of cell. We all know that every living organisms are composed of cells. So cell is the structural unit of living organism and cell is called the functional unit of living organism also because all the vital processes like respiration, nutrition and the removal of waste, that is excretion. All these life processes are carried out by a single cell. And a cell has independent existence and capable of self-duplication or self-reproduction. So cell is called the structural and functional unit of living organisms. So let's talk about the discovery of cell. In the year 1665, in the year 1665, Robert Hooke, an English scientist, first discovered the cell. But the cell discovered by Robert Hooke was dead cells. He took a thin slice of cork. Robert Hooke took a thin slice of cork from oak tree, the Spanish oak tree, and its botanical name is Quercus suber. So he took a thin slice of cork and observed under his handmade microscope. So what he observed that this cork was made up of many little compartments that looked like honeycomb. So look at this structure. This cork was found to be composed of many little compartments that looked like honeycomb. He named these compartments as cell because the word cell is derived from the Latin word. The word cell is derived from the Latin word cellula. Okay. In Latin, cella means hollow space or compartment. So from cellula, the term cell was coined by Robert Hooke. So in this way, he first discovered the cell, and it was the dead cells. This is a thin slice of cork from oak tree. And Robert Hooke published his findings. Robert Hooke wrote a book and he published his findings in a book, Micrographia. So the name of the book written by Robert Hooke was Micrographia. So later, another Dutch merchant, Dutch scientist, we all know the name Antony von Leeuwenhoek. Antony von Leeuwenhoek. He was a Dutch merchant, Dutch scientist, and he is known as the father of microbiology. He first discovered the living cell. We know that cell was first discovered by Robert Hooke in the year 1665, and Antony von Leeuwenhoek discovered the living cell in the year 1674. So in 1674, he first discovered the living cell. He discovered cells like the bacteria. We know all that bacteria was discovered by Antony von Leeuwenhoek. And bacteria, the blood cells, that is RBC, the sieve tube, and the protozoans. He discovered, etc. He discovers the living cells like bacteria, RBC, sieve tube, protozoans, and also spawn cells. sperm cells. So these cells were first discovered by Anthony von Leeuwenhoek. So we came to know that Anthony von Leeuwenhoek first discovered the living cell. Then we'll study the cell theory. We know that all living organisms are composed of cells and cells products. So cell theory comes after the work of M.J. Scladen. M.J. Scladen. He was a German botanist. M.J. Scladen, a German botanist. He studied many plant tissues and he found that the plant tissues are made up of one or more several kinds of cells. And in the year 1838, he studied different types of plant tissues and found that the plant tissues are made up of several types of cells. And in the following year, that is in 1839, another German zoologist known as he was Theodor Schwann. Theodor Schwann, a German zoologist. Is a German zoologist. He also studied the animal tissues and he found that the animal cells lack cell wall, and these animal cells are only bounded by a fine delicate membrane. Nowadays, we call it as cell membrane. Cell membrane. So Theodor Schwann reported that animal cells have only a outer membrane. We call it as a cell membrane or plasma membrane. And in the year 1839, M.J. Scladen and Theodor Schwann jointly proposed cell theory. So what he gave the statement, the cell theory, as that all living organisms are composed of cells. All living organisms are composed of cells. And second is the cell is the basic structural and functional unit of living organism. Cell is the basic structural and functional unit of living organisms. But they could not explain how new cells are produced. So in the year 1855, a German pathologist named as Rudolf Virchow. In the year 1855, a German pathologist named as Rudolf Virchow stated that new cells originate from pre-existing cells. So if there are pre-existing cells, the new cells can be produced from those pre-existing cells. Thus he gave the statement, omnis cellula e cellula, means the new cells originate from pre-existing cells. So now the modern cell theory. So the point of cell theory was given as the first that the point all living organisms are composed of cells, and the cell is the basic structural and functional unit of living organisms. And this point was added that the new cells, the number 3 point, new cells originate from pre-existing cell. The cells that are not formed de novo. If there is pre-existing cells, the new cells are produced by the division of pre-existing cells. And the chemical compositions, the metabolism, the fourth point, the chemical composition and metabolism of all cells are basically similar. Are basically similar means the metabolic processes and the chemical composition of similar type of cells are basically similar. And the fifth point, that is the function of an organism. We are made up of cells. So cell is our basic structural unit and cells also are functional unit. So the organism function is determined by all the activities and outcome, all the activities and interaction among the constituent cells. So organism is made up of cells. So this point states that the function of an organism as a whole, the function of an organism as a whole is the outcome of all the activities and interaction among the constituent cells. How the constituent cells behave, how the constituent cells act, that finally determine the function of an organism. Suppose there are absence of nutrient, there is a lack of nutrient in the cells. So the cells without any nutrient, suppose the cells become weak. Finally, the organism feel weakness. If the temperature of every cell rises by 1 degree Celsius, so finally the organism feels fever. So the function of organism as a whole is the sum of all the activities and interaction among the constituent cells. And the last point, that is each cell has a centrally placed nucleus. Each cell has a centrally placed nucleus and some amount of protoplasm. A cell has some amount of protoplasm and a centrally placed nucleus. So this is the modern cell theory. And thereafter, some organisms were found, those who do not obey the cell theory. So we study it as the exception to cell theory. So the drawback of the exception to cell theory. Exception to cell theory. Cell theory. So which organism of the cell which do not obey the cell theory? First is the viruses. We know the viruses. Viruses, these are cellular. These are non-cellular organisms because the viruses don't have any cellular architecture. Viruses, viroids, and prions. Viruses, viroids, and prions. They don't have any cellular architecture, so they do not obey the cell theory. The cell theory states that each organism is made up of cells, and viruses is not a cell, so it does not obey. The viruses do not obey the cell theory. And the second is the eubacteria and archaebacteria. Eubacteria and archaebacteria, they do not have a true nucleus. The last point of cell theory says that each cell has a centrally placed nucleus, right? But eubacteria and archaebacteria, they do not have a true nucleus. They have an incipient nucleus that is called nuclear. So these two organisms do not obey the cell theory. And the third is about the RBC. We know the RBC. RBC live without nucleus. RBC, the red blood cells, have no nucleus. When the RBC undergoes maturation, in the secondary stage, they have no nucleus. But in primary stage, nucleus is present. But when RBC undergoes maturation, the nucleus disappears. And we know that hemoglobins are loaded in the RBC, right? So RBC and also sieve tube of phloem, they don't have any nucleus. They live without nucleus, so they do not obey the cell theory. And the next point is some organisms like algae. समज like Vaucheria. Vaucheria, this algae has a multinucleate mass. Multinucleate mass of protoplasm. Multinucleate mass of protoplasm. Its protoplasm does not divide, and the entire body is a single cell, and it contains many nuclei. Okay, the Vaucheria, its body, its cell has many nuclei. Okay, so many nuclei, and in fungi like Rhizopus mucor. These fungi, their cells also contain many nuclei. The cell theory states that each cell has a centronucleus nucleus, a single nucleus, but Rhizopus and mucor, they have many nuclei in the cell, many nuclei. So these are the exception to cell theory. So this is about the discovery of cell and the cell theory and its exception. Thanks.